Hello, everyone, and welcome to NC SLAMA's 2021 annual conference. Myself, Brian Whitson, and my incredible co-host. Introduce yourself.
I'm Chauncey.
Hey, Chauncey. Glad that we're working together to offer post-pandemic best practices for supporting digital learning. It's quite a handful. For those of you that would like, since you're watching the recording, our bit.ly is down at the bottom, and we also have a QR code that you're welcome to scan with your phone or mobile device. If you need to contact us, we have some information on the screen and in the presentation. Chauncey, tell us a little bit more about you. What do you do and where are you?
Well, Brian, I'm the media coordinator at Ben L. Smith High School, and I've been there. I started a week before we went out for the pandemic, so I've been there 2 years. And we know each other through Rowan Salisbury schools, but you're no longer there. So tell us where you are.
I was in Rowan Salisbury for 21 years in a variety of positions, and I'm now a digital teaching and learning consultant with DPI, and I proudly serve the Piedmont Triad region along with the other parts of the state. We'd love for you to follow us on social media and see what we're up to, and we're excited we can bring this experience to you. Chauncey, as you mentioned, you went to Ben L. Smith a week before we closed down for the pandemic. So talk to us some about that experience walking into that school a week before we closed for pandemics.
Well, it was a normal school. I mean, there was kids there were teachers there, people coming in and out, and it was pretty exciting. And then all of a sudden, everybody was gone.
I know it's crazy, and we all thought we'd be back in a week or two, maybe a little bit longer spring break, but little did we know it would go into the entire school year and finish us up. And then we came back in 2019, 2020. Actually, I messed that up. We came back the following year in 2021, and we kind of had a different kind of setup. Chelsea, what were things like at your school?
Well, unlike Rowan Salisbury schools, which I know came back as a hybrid, we came back remote the whole year until about February, and then we weren't even at 25%. The kids could elect to come back or they could stay and do remote learning. But we spent the 2021 school year doing Teams, remote, Zoom, using Canvas, and it was different.
Yeah, I think it was different for so many. For us, as you indicated, we had part of our kids half the week and the other half the second part of the week. And even then, you could tell it was very different. And we had to really work with how we provided instructions to our kids in the digital world. Even though we had a lot of them still face to face, we still had at least half of them at any time learning remotely. And so, how can we best cultivate the tools we have, maximize them, and use them in a way that helps our students to learn while we don't overextend and maybe just really tire them out with everything. And so you found this really interesting research that came out in January 2021. Tell us some about that survey.
Well, the RAND did a survey, and they discovered that 1 out of every 4 teachers was contemplating not coming back to teaching. And they said that it was mostly the stress of the remote year or the pandemic year.
And I will add, I knew at the time I was an instructional coach at Carson High School, and I spent a lot of time helping to support teachers with just their own social and emotional needs because it was exhausting. In some cases, we had teachers teaching a combination of face-to-face and remotely at the same time, and it was very exhausting to them. And then they were having to constantly change and adjust and find many ways to support the students, the parents, and community. So it was definitely very stressful, and so we can understand that. And now that we've come back and we more or less have all our students back at one time, we're terming this post-pandemic, although some may argue that we're still kind of, in the tail end of the pandemic. we definitely have to try to recoup where we are and help our students move forward. And Chauncey, what are some of those expectations that we're going to see or that we are experiencing right now?
Well, you're probably seeing gaps in social and emotional skills on both the teacher and the student level. And you're going to see some learning loss because a lot of the kids sort of tuned out for the remote year. I think some of the teachers might have tuned out a little bit too, but I think it was acceptable because it was just a really stressful time. You also can see some accelerated learning, some kids that really enjoyed the um, remote learning because they could explore more things and they could learn more things and they could go at their own pace. And you probably see an unhealthy dependency on technology, and that's both on the teacher and the student side. And some fear: is it over yet? We're going to go remote again. A lot of my teachers keep thinking, oh, we're going to have a cluster and we're going to have to go out. And I'm like, we're 7 weeks in and we are not out yet. So I'm like, come on, keep plugging, guys. And you're going to see some possible mental and physical health issues from
Yeah,
the
and I think
stress.
along those lines, obviously, as we have students, to individual quarantining and stuff, our teachers are still having to provide alternative means of instruction. And I think along with that, obviously, the great unknown, which will definitely lead to more mental and physical stress and maybe over a long period of time, definitely there's more health issues. So we're going to have to keep all those things in mind. And, it's tough to be an educator these days with so much going on. Not to mention the social political aspect as well, but just to be in the classroom and to serve our students. Um, I love this quote that you added. What do I mean? I have to go to class and do things. I showed up. Shouldn't that count? And maybe last year, to a degree, this was partially, if not completely, true. But I feel like this year we need to try to get back, don't you?
Yes, we do. A lot of kids got credit for doing very little last year. And I understand why. It's just listening to the teachers going, I can't believe we're going to pass these kids just because they came in and took this test, or just because they came to class. And how do we know they were really there because they never turned their cameras on? It was an ordeal.
So yeah, and trying to help our students and even our teachers readjust to the new normal, because I think it's going to be different from how it was previous to when we went home a couple of years ago. And so I think what we wanted to gear this presentation to is, how do we bring in our students and our teachers where they are and kind of create classrooms where our students and teachers can still be very successful. And obviously that's an ever changing target depending on the communities where we are. And you've came up with some really incredible procedures and some other tips. So let's talk some about them. You've included to create expectations for your classroom and to include the social emotional learning, the SEL route, and to have your students create these expectations. Tell us a little more about those.
Well, Brian, this isn't new. This is something you've always wanted to have, but I think it needs to be more emphasized now that the kids have sort of not had any rules. And I'm not saying that expectations are rules, but they're guidelines for how class is going to go, and to include them, to give them a voice in what they want from class. How to handle the kid who keeps yelling in the back of the classroom. You want the kids to have an input on to how the class should be run.
And I think also the SEL piece is going to be important. And obviously, that's going to look different from classroom to classroom, grade span, and such. But, how do we allow our students, whether they're, those elementary kids or maybe some of those high school students who don't routinely express some of their feelings, how do we create environments where they feel valued, they feel safe, and then we allow them an outlet to express what they're going through and know that we're there to support them. And so I think these will be some, definitely some great opportunity for us to grow and develop those meaningful, substantial relationships with our students and helping them to make sense of this ever-changing world. You also mentioned establishing a routine. Talk to us about the importance of routine, because I know we've always had those in education, but why are they more important now?
Because the kids haven't had a routine. I mean, yes, they've logged on to their course or met with a teacher, but now they're back at school, and some of them have. I'm at a high school. Some of them have never been at a high school, and they're juniors or they're sophomores, and they didn't really have a freshman year, and they don't know how things are supposed to work. So establishing a routine, telling your kids this is what we're going to do when we get to class, and this is how things happen, I think makes them feel more comfortable, and they're not as lost as they can be.
And definitely reminding them of those routines after, work days or after breaks or even after a weekend, coming in and reminding them, just being very explicit and intentional. Because you're
Or
right.
having or having them post it on your board. It's like this is this is the bell ringer, and this is what we do after the bell ringer, and etc.
And I think you hit on a key point, and the importance of posting things will definitely help, because we have, at the high school level, your ninth, 10th, and 11th graders have never had a full traditional year of high school. And one principal said to me, in a way, it's like we have 3 years of freshmen at the high school level. So trying to help them go through that is definitely important. You also mentioned assigning roles to students in the classroom and in assignments. Extend on that.
Well, I know this is something they do a lot in middle and elementary school, because someone is assigned to answer the door if someone comes to the door, and someone's assigned to um, do things around the classroom. But I think you should do it at all levels. And with regards to assignments, I think we need to scaffold them a little more. And when we do like group assignments, give kids roles. Say, give them an option of roles, and then let them pick in the group who wants to do what. But you need someone who's a note taker. You need someone who's going to be the I'm going to call them the inventory man, to get all the information that you need, whether it be physical or informational. So
And I think along with that, some of the simple tasks like you mentioned in running the classroom, but also in the work. This is a good chance when we talk about the new normal you reference to help our kids develop a lot of those life skills they're going to need. So how do you work collaboratively in a group? And how do you know if you're meeting your role? And I think that's one of the things that media coordinators and school librarians and other instructional coaches can definitely stress, is to help teachers to do that, because it shouldn't be a return back to how we were prior to the pandemic, because that's definitely going a couple of steps back. And you also mentioned the importance of having high standards for students. Why is that important?
you need to give them something to reach for. Because if you set your standards low, then people aren't going to want to reach for it. It's just, oh, this is all I have to do. Well, apathy, it's out there.
Yeah, and our students will reach whatever bars we put for them, or and if they're low bars, then yeah, they're going to definitely become apathetic and tuned out in a lot of cases. And we definitely want them to strive for higher standards, so even if they fall short, they've still progressed. So those are definitely some good reminders. Technology, Chauncey, do you think it's going away?
It's not going away. And I think it's really funny, because I'm at a high school and we went 1-to-1, and my teachers are like, well, why do we need to keep our Canvas class up if we're in person? And I'm like, you need to use it. You have this computer. It's the best way to get information to your kids. It just floors me that people don't want to use it.
And I think you also hit on a key theme, is that enhance and supplement your instruction. As we talk about our new normal, um, a lot of systems in schools made tremendous growth in providing devices to their students. And a lot of our staff have grown tremendously in their ability to deliver instruction through digital methods. And I think that we probably didn't need a pandemic to do that, but I think the pandemic forced a lot of us who had not considered going that way, getting the resources, getting the um, professional development, delivering digital instruction and the devices, that it kind of accelerated us going that way. So now we have this and this whole ideal of enhancing and supplementing the instruction. We have the ability to differentiate for our students based on where they are, whether that's their pre-assessment, their own interests, or even, the background knowledge they're bringing. And so we have these incredible tools that if we can just maximize and use them effectively, we can really enhance the instructional aspect in our classroom and boost that student learning. So that's very important. One of the ways that we can do that, Chauncey, is flipping your classroom. Talk to us about how to flip the classroom.
Well, when you think of flipping your classroom, you want to do you want your kids to hear your lectures or the information you're providing outside of the classroom. You don't have to stand in front of them. You don't have to be the sage on the stage. Okay, resign from that role. You need a new role. Use your class time for interactive lessons, for problem-based learning, stuff that kids need help on and can do in the classroom.
And I also love this idea of some teachers will preload their lessons with some background information, because I think we could oftentimes spend a lot of time in the classroom on a lot of background information that 60 or 70% of your kids may have, or just need that 1 or 2 minute review. And so this really helps us to maximize, because I would think when I flip my classroom and my students come to class, the day of, then I can begin to differentiate some and create different groups or maybe even station rotations where I can work with kids who maybe needed additional help. Maybe their background isn't as advanced. For those kids who are more advanced, then I can create some blended lesson routines where they can go further. I also like this ideal of, let's move in from the stage on the stage, because that's very tiring for teachers. It takes a lot out of you. And where you're a facilitator instead of being the dispenser of information. One of the recommendations I've seen or I hear, well, kids aren't going to watch this in advance. Well, maybe the next day when they come to class, that's one of the stations that kids or students can go to. If you didn't watch it for whatever reason, then you start off here, and that's one of the stations. You want to encourage them to watch it in advance, but that can be one of the ways you respond as well. Chauncey, let's talk about how to level up. What are some things that we can really do with our digital instruction now?
Well, and this hit me last week because I had a teacher who wanted the computer to read to their student, and they're like, "Well, we don't have the extension." And I was like, "But they don't need the extension. So let your computers read to your students." I mean, if it's not an app on your computer, it's something you can add to your computer so that you can highlight the text and it'll read to them. And that way they hear the information, which might help them better than just reading the information.
Yes. And I will say, almost all schools are using some aspect of Google Chrome to access articles or things. Apple devices already have the accessibility built in, as do Microsoft devices. But even in Chrome, it's very easy to get it to read. And if you need help, reach out to your school's media coordinator or technology coach, and they can definitely help you. So I think that's awesome. Chauncey, I'm really intrigued by this ideal you included about making videos. Tell us some about that.
So some of your kids get things better than others. We all know that. So why not have the students that get the info make videos to share to the kids? Because kids can share things and explain things sometimes better than you can explain it to another kid. So have them make a video and then put them on your Canvas page or your Google Classroom or whatever LMS you're using. And it's two-sided. You get the information across, and then this kid who's made this video gets a, oh wow, kudos, I'm on the class page. So,
and I love that ideal of having students create, because that's one of the higher level activities we see in Blooms. But when our kids are creating their own videos, then they have become creators and designers. And they also developed this sense of student agency where I've made a video and now someone's going to benefit from it. And some of these videos can be really outstanding. The teacher can reuse from semester to semester, year to year. So you also said ditch the paper. Think about the LMS. Tell us about LMSs.
LMS is the learning management system, and there's a variety of them. I know that Guilford County uses Canvas. There's Google Classroom that you can use. There's Schoology, and I don't know of any secondary schools that are using Blackboard, but Blackboard is out there as well. And it's a place where you can create assignments and get them out to kids so that you don't have to use paper. And most of them have a program to create assignments and quizzes, which you can do multiple choice, you can do short answer, and some of them even have speed graders, which will let the computer grade the stuff.
And I love this idea because then we can create digital submissions. And, I used to have a lot of kids back when I was more paper based would say I lost the paper, and I didn't necessarily, I wasn't able to question that. But digitally, if a kid submits it, I can see it, or they can log in and I can see maybe if they're in a pinned in status. So it's pretty clear there. I've never lost a paper in a digital LMS. So that takes away a lot of questions that kids can.
The dog can eat it.
Yeah, the dog, it's difficult to eat my Google Doc, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk some about lesson plans. What are some things we can go into our new normal with our lesson plans?
Well, I think in the past we had some fluff work. We had assignments because we had kids in the classroom and they needed to be doing something. So we created some busy work. But being remote, we know that we don't need the busy work anymore. We need to give active projects that the kids can do and grow from, and kind of ditch the worksheets and things.
And I think, what I'm seeing here is you talked about, quit being the sage on the stage, resign from that role, and be more of a facilitator. And as we are designing those new processes and procedures in our classroom, this is one of the best things I think we can do is to move to these assignments and learning experiences that really matter and connect students to the world that they're living in through the content or the course they're taking. Collaborative work is a huge thing. A lot of employers are reporting that, they're struggling to find employees who know how to effectively collaborate together. And I think that's a skill that we in the K-12 setting have to definitely help our students learn. It's challenging, but we've got to give them that experience of how I work with people, even if we disagree, and what kind of consensus can we reach. Recording content in small chunks. Extend on that for us, Chance.
Well, we have known that kids' attention spans are becoming smaller and smaller. And we learned remotely that you didn't need to talk for an hour and a half. That if you gave the kid a small chunk of information and then let them reflect or do an assignment of some sort, they had a tendency to retain more of it. So do the same thing in your classroom. Do small chunks. Record your content, or record your students doing content, creating their own stuff, and you can put it into your LMS.
Exactly. And we're going to, on the next slide, talk about assessment. But we did add in create and remix rubrics here. And after we do assessments, we'll talk about that. But I think rubrics can be a great way to help your students know what's expected of them, but to do it in a way that gives them a way to achieve that at different levels. And with assessment, Chauncey, you mentioned less grades and more feedback. Why is that important?
I'm going to say this and people are not going to like it. A grade is just a number. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a high number or a low number, it's just a number. And I think we need to spend a little more time with kids and give them some critical feedback. Well, this was good, but you need to look at this and reflect or redirect or figure out what's wrong with that and then come back to it. And we don't do that a lot. We give people grades and say, here and go. And that's not good for the kids. It's not helpful.
And I think too often we don't give them feedback that helps them grow. I may get a paper back and make a 91, and the student behind me may make an 88. And what really is the difference in what they know? It's 3 points in a numeric grade, but there's probably not a lot of difference in what I know and am able to do. I think that feedback piece, and we have to also train our students on how to find feedback, how to use it and understand its purpose. I've found a lot of our students even now are struggling with, why am I reading this feedback? Because they're so used to a grade, but they're not used to that feedback. And so we've got to very explicitly and intentionally train them in feedback, and also work with our teachers on understanding, what type of feedback is most important. If I'm writing an essay, maybe I choose 5 areas that are going to be my focus, and maybe spelling isn't one of them, and I can mention it, but spelling may not have been a core area. And we'll talk about that some with rubrics. You also said more iteration. Tell us about that. What did you mean by more iteration?
Students don't travel through school on the same level. Some people need to do certain tasks more times to get it. And I think when we're going through lessons, we don't give students the opportunity to redo something if they don't get it right the first time. So we need to build in where they can go back and redo something and try again until they actually get it. Because even if they don't get it and we keep going, they're still going to be back here, and the rest of the class is going to be way ahead of them.
Well, I think about, if we have effective feedback in place, that can create this loop of iteration where students can use that to get better each time and create a product that is really much improved in the end if they go through the different iterations. So I like that. Along with that, you mentioned flexible deadlines. Tell us some about that. How does that work in there with these other ideals you've shared?
Again, we're not all on the same page, and we all can't have stuff turned in by X amount of date. And I'm thinking of our kids remotely, that you might have said it was due on Friday, but because we were remote, we gave them some extra time, because maybe they didn't have the computer that day because their little sister was using it, or maybe they didn't have Wi-Fi that day and they had to go sit in somebody's parking lot to do homework. So we were more flexible during remote. And I think that should carry over to when we come back and face to face as well.
Well, and I think to a degree, it also pulls in some empathy. I mean, we may have some students who, for whatever reason, don't do the assignment or choose not to. But more often than not, in my experience as an educator, we find that our students lots of times have, some barriers to overcome, especially when they're outside of our classroom. And so that flexible deadline kind of allows us to work with them while still helping them to access the content and meet those learning goals. And finally, open resource testing. Take that one away, Chauncey.
So open resource testing, back in our day when we were in school, it was open book test.
Mhm.
And when we were remote, we had no idea what the kids were doing when they were testing. I mean, some kids might have had more than one device and had one device up with the test open and one device up Googling things. So we need to embrace open resource testing. So that's going to mean changing our test questions, that they're not, I can't just Google the answer. I need to be able to interpret the information and then provide an answer that's an interpretation.
And I think along with that, yeah, too often, a lot of tests I've given in the past were simple recall. It was kind of lower order testing questions with that lower order of blooms. You know, what was the date for this? Or why was, the Declaration of Independence important? And a lot of that's a simple recall. But I think if we design assessment tasks where we can really see our students apply that information and use these resources, if we operate under the understanding that our students all have access to these resources, then we can really design some assessment that really kind of informs us in a very extensive way about what our students know and the nuances of that and what they're able to do. And so I love the ideal of open resource tests. And I think we have to have our students understand it doesn't mean you're going to find all the answers on Google. Um, a very wise person, Jill Jarrow, once said to me, if we're giving our students assignments or test questions they can Google, are we really assessing or giving them challenging work? And I've always thought about that. If it's something I can Google, then is it really something that our students will see as a good investment of their time and efforts? And so I like this ideal. Kind of going along the same lines, I borrowed this rubric last week. Catlin Tucker tweeted this, and we have a link in the slide deck. But she talked about rubrics, and I think this is a great opportunity because she developed a simple 4-point rubric where we design our criteria, and you can have as many criteria as you want, but she designs the criteria, and these can be your learning goals or targets. So criterion 1, I am able to do something, and you can look at your standard course of study, your content standards, however, and you develop those skills or criteria that are most important in the lesson or the project that you're getting ready to assess. And then students have 4 points to be rated: beginning, developing, proficient, and mastery. And obviously, mastery is where we want them to be. However, when we talk about that ideal of reiteration, um, of letting our students redo assignments, this can be a great way for feedback. And I oftentimes pull my feedback from the rubric as I'm grading assignments for students. I teach chemistry lab at a nearby college. And when we grade our students' lab report, we actually have a rubric we use. And it's pretty self-sufficient at this point. It's clear what you did or did not do. And then I always give a little more specific feedback for students so they know what they can do to move ahead in the future if they need to. And we have a link to this in the slide deck as well. So I'd encourage you to check this out and look at developing this. If you're just getting started, develop it for one lesson or one unit rather, one project, and try to make the criteria pretty straightforward as you're developing those. And if you'll go to Catlin's blog, you can learn more about that. Moving along that, we also want to be sure that what's occurring in the classroom is inclusive of all our students and their different needs. And we've mentioned differentiated learning. Chauncey, why is that important in being inclusive of all students in our classrooms?
Because all of our students in our classroom aren't on the same level. And it can be a variety of reasons. I'm at a school with a high Hispanic population, and they're not always on the same level as the rest of the kids in the class because there's a language issue. So we need to take in consideration that and help create lessons that will help them get to where they need to go.
And one of the best ways to do that, especially if the language development is an issue, they can be quite well advanced in literacy in their own language, but obviously with the translation and all that. But there's tools out there between some people will use Google Translate. I personally prefer Microsoft's Immersive Reader, which we're seeing integrated more into different technology products to kind of help overcome and eliminate some of those barriers. And being inclusive, really what we're doing is trying to identify the barriers that a student, regardless as to their particular background, but any barriers, whether it's language, maybe they're just not able to read, they are not reading at grade level, that we find ways to help students overcome those barriers and still give them access to the information. And you mentioned, even having some of the articles read to students. Some students will do better hearing the information and helping them understand, maybe they're better auditory than they are with reading. And while we still want them to read and, develop, progress in those skills, this is one of the ways we can differentiate that in a pretty good way.
And then you reminded me with reading, and you want kids to be able to read. You can use an app to have them read a small passage out loud, and they can hear how they sound when they read it, and that can be helpful for them to learn more in reading.
Oh, extremely. And I think in elementary school, where oftentimes I keep reading logs, I think for a kid to hear themselves read can be very useful in helping them to progress in that skill and their ability. It's also important that we have materials that represent the diverse representation of our students. Tell us more about that, Chauncey, because I know that's a huge point.
But you want to make sure that you include different cultures and different backgrounds in your classroom materials. And since a lot of everything is now online and you have access, most of the schools got computers of some sort, then it's easier to pull in information about different cultures and different populations and incorporate them into your lesson plans.
And I think, as we look at the new normal, as we've often so referenced during this presentation, that gives us the opportunity for students to see people who look like them in areas where they're successful. I know for a lot of students at the college where I teach, we have a really phenomenal chemistry professor who's African American female. And lots of times, this is the first time a lot of those students have had exposure to see someone who looks like them, whether female or African American, in a role where they see this person has succeeded in getting her PhD in chemistry. And so when I think about that, that can be huge for students to see that. Because if you're only seeing people who do not look like you, then you have to wonder, what are people who look like me doing? And, we oftentimes talk about, obviously ethnicity, but also, different abilities. If we look at the Paralympics that occurred after the Olympics, I think we saw the opportunity for a lot of people who had challenges be very successful. And so we definitely want to make sure we have that diverse representation in our classroom. And relationships, ultimately, all learning is social, that, we learn best when we have relationships where we feel safe, valued, and cared about. Tell us more about that, Chauncey.
You again, like you just said, we need to be able to build relationships with our kids and get to know them more than just a name or a number, and that helps them grow and become better students.
And oftentimes we find our students are doing things we would never have imagined ourselves at their age doing. They have a lot of interesting experiences, things they're into, and that's really incredible. Also, more restorative practices. Share some about that.
We have a lot of what seems like punitive practices and not restorative. Just because someone is doing something wrong, we're putting them out of the classroom, we're doing this. We need to find other ways to handle issues in the classroom.
Yeah, and I think helping them to see that while their action or behavior may not be appropriate for a classroom, the end result, taking them out of the classroom, does not serve them well. So what are some things we can do to work with them to, ultimately keep them in the classroom and learning, but also learn some, of the important behaviors they need to learn, so when they get into adulthood, then they can be definitely a more productive member of our community.
Yeah,
And
not calling their boss names would be good.
yes, yeah, learning how to respond to adults appropriately, even when you're frustrated, right?
Right.
And you also mentioned, lots of times this will lead to, more fun, or, probably more contentment with both students and the educator in the classroom. I think it can be really powerful. One of the activities that I wanted to share is this 5 pictures and 15 words that we developed when I was at China Grove Middle. And if you click on this link, it will do a forced copy for you. But what we did is we basically took 5 pictures and put on a slide in a Google slide deck. And we gave students in groups the ability to choose the 5 words or up to 15 words. And we gave them a task or a question. And we had them work in groups. And then the group shares their responses. And we did this with a group of teachers first. And what we did is this was at the end of March 2019 when we had just closed schools, and we wanted teachers to be able to kind of have some SEL for themselves. So we gave them 5 pictures and we said, you have 15 words. How do these pictures represent what you've experienced this year? That was their task. And so we saw some themes, and this is just one group I pulled. You can see with the coffee, priorities, self-care, the lemur playing a trumpet, marching to a different tune, because I think we all were. The baseball field, this group saw it as collaboration and encouragement. The rainbow was hope for the future. And then the little kind of token creatures up here, they look like game tokens to me with some tops. They saw as creative engagement. And that's an activity you can do just for SEL. You can also tie it into your content standards and have students do as a review or a pre-assessment and to kind of pull those things together. So that's something we're happy to share with you. An identity chart. Chauncey, tell us some about identity charts.
This is just a fun way to get to know people. And this one I think is quite interesting because you don't have to be in person. I mean, you could do this remotely or do it as an activity, and you put the person's name in the middle, and then the bubbles outside of the middle one is just information about that person.
Exactly. And I've shown you one for me here, and you can see all the different things that I kind of value. So I think in looking at this, you would definitely learn a lot about me. This is a link to a Google drawing that Eric Curtis developed, and we have adapted it to be an identity chart. And we have in the slide deck the forced copy that you can then share with your students, but it's super easy because you just go in and edit it. And again, you can also use this for an academic reason. If you're looking at a topic, maybe imagery, if you're in an English class, and how you could look at different things students have learned as well. We're focused on the SEL component, but these can very easily be adapted to an academic focus as well and reused over time. So, Chauncey, we have some helpful resources. One is Pixabay and Unsplash. What I love about these are free images. They don't require you to attribute them, but we definitely want to encourage that just to be good digital citizens, right?
Yes.
Another one that I love using, especially if you're a teacher who values creativity, the Adobe Education Exchange. And not a lot of educators I'm finding know about this, but this is a completely free resource of lesson plans where you can go in and you can find various resources that are out there that teachers have submitted, and you can look for lesson plans and projects, and you can always adapt these to meet your own needs. And Chauncey, did I tell you this was free?
Yes, you did.
And in a lot of cases, this does use the Adobe Spark and other Adobe products, but even if you don't have access to those, you can use alternatives. Adobe Spark is one of those tools that is now free when you sign up, and you can sign up your students as well and have a classroom. And so I would encourage you to look at that. Chauncey, one that has come open recently is the Go Open NC. It's a open educational resource, and it's all North Carolina standards. And I would encourage you, if you have good lesson plans or ideals, to go here and you can submit. You have to sign in using your NC Ed Cloud assignment, but you can also search for other lesson plans and resources that North Carolina teachers and educators have submitted. So feel free to check that out. And Chauncey, we have some additional references that can be helpful to our teachers. Share some about them.
Well, the first one is Jennifer Gonzalez, and she does the cult of pedagogy, and that's where I got a lot of the information about how to approach post-pandemic teaching. And
So,
the
yeah.
other reference is for the Rand quote.
Okay. And I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with Jennifer Gonzalez's work, that you definitely check it out. She has some incredible podcasts as well, and all that's at her website, Cult of Pedagogy. And so, Chauncey, let's read this last quote together.
Okay.
Let's use the disruption
of
I'll
learning
let you read.
to fundamentally change education as we know it.
And I think if there's one theme I've heard through this presentation is the new normal. Let's figure out the new normal. Let's make it better than the old normal. And hopefully you have seen some incredible tips and things to think about. We would encourage you, if you have other suggestions, to include those and tweet them using the NC Slamma hashtag. In case you want to reach out to us, here is our information again. And we appreciate you taking time to join us today. And we wish each of you a great rest of the year. We know it's tough out there. In many ways, it's more challenging than even the past 2 years. So on behalf of Chauncey and me, we appreciate you. And Chauncey, I'll let you have the final goodbye.
Have a good conference, guys.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.